An exotic feast with Jacques Pepin in 15 minutes on BBC One, after excursions to Cheshire and Yorkshire for Treasures of the Trust.
Guarding the strategically important gap in the Purbeck Hills of South Dorset, the ruins of what was once a great Norman fortress. 350 years ago, during the Civil War, the ramparts of Corfe Castle were the scene of a dramatic siege during which the Parliamentary army tried for months to capture the stronghold of the staunchly royalist Banks family. Today the ruins are popular with tourists, but in the winter of 1644 the great walls of Corfe withstood attack after attack. Eventually, under the command of brave Lady Mary Banks, the castle fell, but the parliamentarians were so impressed by the courage of the defenders that the garrison was allowed to retreat unscathed. And in a gesture of reconciliation, Lady Banks was even allowed to take the keys of Corfe with her. Today her figure stands beside that of the man whose name she defended with such spirit, King Charles I, inside the house the Banks family eventually had built to replace the ruined seat at Corfe. The original design of the house by Sir Roger Pratt was completed 15 years after the end of the Civil War and produced a very grand, oblong, three-storey building. The gardens which surround it, with a terrace designed by Sir Charles Barry, the architect of the Houses of Parliament, give a hint to the dramatic changes the inside of the house underwent in the years that followed. Lions sculptured in imitation of those guarding the Capitol in Rome. And an obelisk brought from the Temple of Isis on the Egyptian island of Philae in 1815. Kingston Lacy, filled with fabulous treasures from all over the Mediterranean, is really a huge monument to the dreams of one man, William John Banks, who throughout the first half of the 19th century sent back hundreds of works of art from his travels around Europe and Africa. In 1840 he acquired the Grimaldi sisters, superbly painted by Rubens when he was only 29, the one dressed for her wedding, the other being attended to by her dwarf servant, thought to be an allegory of Beauty and the Beast. Also in the saloon, a Titian, the portrait of a noble Italian patrician, painted in the early 1540s and acquired by William John Banks in Bologna in 1820. Beside them, a study of the four elements by Jan Bruegel: earth and fire, air and water. The most famous masterpiece at Kingston, however, hangs in the dining room. It's The Judgment of Solomon, painted by Sebastiano del Piombo between 1505 and 1510, and bought by William John whilst on holiday in Italy, with advice from his friend Lord Byron. The picture was never finished. The executioner about to slay the baby the two women are arguing over should be holding a sword. And the baby itself is missing. William John was also one of the first Europeans to explore the heart of Egypt, a century before it became fashionable to do so. In 1815 and again in 1818, he made daring expeditions into the upper reaches of the Nile, sending home his trophies as he went. He and a group of friends spent a month at Abu Simbel, making brilliant copies of the wall paintings inside the great temple of Ramesses II. The men worked half naked in great heat, with only candlelight to help them. Later, though, disaster came to the master of Kingston Lacy. Back at home, William John, pictured here in oriental dress, was prosecuted for homosexuality. He spent the rest of his life in exile. Although the house here remained his consuming passion, he never stopped sending back treasures to furnish it. This is the Spanish Room, full of sumptuous works procured by William John on his visit to Spain during the Peninsular War against Napoleon. It provides a stunning setting for the collection of 17th century Spanish paintings. Alongside them, another masterpiece, Cardinal Massimi of Rome, painted by Diego Velázquez in 1649. Much of the glowing light of the room is reflected from the tooled and gilded panels of leather which clad the walls and which came from Venice. The three pairs of painted doors, each panel representing a different month of the English year, were designed by William John himself in 1851, still in exile in Italy. 4 years later, he was dead, leaving behind him a great splash of Mediterranean colour in an otherwise very green Dorset countryside. Castellcoch, the Red Castle, built in the 13th century by Welsh princes and now towering over what through the centuries has become the finest Baroque terraced garden in Britain. Exactly who the designer of these superb gardens was, and even when they were made, remains something of a mystery. The records have long since been lost, although it's likely they were started by William Herbert, the first Marquis of Powys, in the 1680s. The three extraordinary Italianate terraces on the south front, which form a giant staircase up the steep slopes, were probably created a few years later by the famous gentleman architect William Wynd, who had them blasted out of the limestone rock by gunpowder. The crisp geometric lines of paths, lawns and clipped box are an ideal contrast to the colourful explosion of the borders. The borders themselves, thriving in the rich soil and sheltered from the prevailing winds, have produced the largest collection of herbaceous and tender perennial plants within National Trust gardens. Powys is famous for its container plantings. That favourite Edwardian plant, the fuchsia, is a feature here, with hardy varieties in the borders and tender ones in pots. And from every point, spectacular views beyond the huge lawns and formal gardens below, over the valley of the River Severn towards the Shropshire Hills. Bulging clipped yews planted in the 1720s form fantastic shapes over the hanging gardens beneath the great limestone battlements. And more fantastic treasures lie inside. The castle was long ago converted into a comfortable country house, yet leading from the ballroom, evidence of the extraordinary link that has grown up between this distant corner of Wales and the great Indian subcontinent.
The link is between Lord Robert Clive, who went out to India to make his fame and fortune. Eldest son Edward married into the Herbert family, married Henrietta Herbert. And both her husband, the second Lord Clive, and Henrietta both went out to India and were present when the Battle of Seringapatam took place in 1799. So the two collections of about 300 objects of Lord Robert Clive and his son Edward are in the museum here at Powys Castle. In about 1805, 1810, when the second Lord Clive came back from India, it was sort of normal practice in those times for gentlemen, wealthy gentlemen, to set up their own museum of stuffed birds and animals. So the collection is meant to represent a museum of the early 19th century and throw it in the style of the Brighton Pavilion, which was typical of that sort of period. And also the notices in the cases are all handwritten as they would have been then.
It is a fabulous collection. Clive of India, conqueror of a subcontinent, has left us the legacy of the finest cross-section of Indian art outside India itself. The second Lord Clive and his wife Henrietta returned from their years in India with trunkfuls of souvenirs. Lord Clive was governor of Madras when Tipu Saib, the Sultan of Mysore, was besieged and killed by British troops. His wealth and possessions became the spoils of war. The magnificent gold tiger's head from his throne was one of dozens of gifts to Lady Henrietta. And even the cannon guarding the battlements of Powys came from the foundries of Mysore. Treasures from India, glorious Italian terraces surrounded by a very British Edwardian formal garden. Rarely have there been so many contrasts in one great house.